Good morning, all. Audio check. Can those online also hear me? If so, either unmute and say so or put something in the chat.
We can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you. And our first two speakers after me, Charlie and Cindy, if you want to unmute and just do an audio check.
Good morning, Serina. Charlie here.
Excellent. We hear you. Okay, y'all, we'll get ready in just a moment. We're good. Okay. All right. Oops. And let me go ahead and share screen.
So yeah, nothing on this screen is going to display. It has to be screen 2 for anything to share. And step with all means you're probably going to need this. Just depends if you want to do it like this.
Excellent. Show on this one. Yes, good. All right, let's go ahead and get started just about on time. Welcome to the Planetary In Situ 22 workshop. I want to introduce myself. I'm Serina Diniega, one of the conveners, and we also have Brian Jackson, Alejandro Soto, and Tim Titus, who have helped organize this. And a big thanks as well to all of our science organizing and local organizing committee members. This has been a big labor of love here. And welcome you all in person and all of you who are online. By the way, if there are any issues online, please do throw it into the chat. We have people watching that, and we'll try to make sure that we adjust to the various technical challenges that we are meeting today. I want to point out that today is this whole thing is a hybrid meeting. It's discussion focused. So let's throw all the unusual things together and work it out. So today is a big experimental day. Our hope is to get the wrinkles ironed out. So Thursday, when we really dive into the discussion, we're ready to go. All right. And we want to thank one of our big supporters for this. And
good morning, everybody. I'm Dana Thorpe Patterson. I'm the director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute here at Boise State University. Welcome to one of our classrooms. This is our favorite classroom. Our presenters stand here, and for those of you in the classroom, you can see how distracting it might be with the green belt right behind us and that lovely river flowing through. So welcome to our building. We want to host you as much as we possibly can. If you need anything while you're here for the conference, Jeremy, one of our Osher staffers, is here as support person. Please reach out to him if you need him. For those attending in person, we have a little break room set up off to the side for you. I think some of you have found that. For those of you joining online today, welcome. I think a lot of you are our Osher members, so we're so glad you guys could join us too. We hope you have a wonderful conference. Dr. Jackson and his team have worked very hard to put this together, and I think it's going to be very exciting. So congratulations on your conference and have a good week.
thank you so much, Dana. And we have Jeremy also from Osher supporting us today. And yeah, this would not have been possible without all of their help. Okay, so to explain a little bit of the why we're doing this, thank you. Our aim, overall interest is to constrain models of planetary surface atmosphere interactions. There's a lot of stuff moving around on the planets. Sure, we can do that right now. That's fine. Sorry, we have a quick announcement for the in-person folk.
Hey folks, yeah, welcome. I'm Brian Jackson. Most of you know me, but in case you don't, I just want to welcome you all here to Boise State. Those of you in the room, bathrooms right outside the hallway. Those of you online, I don't know where your bathrooms are. Wi-Fi you should be able to get access to. It's Bronco Guest, and I think they just require an email address, and then they'll send you the login info to that email address. They'll give you like a few minutes access to Wi-Fi, and then you can check your email. Should be simple. Let us know if you can't get that working. Dana's already pointed out we have snacks and coffee. They've provided those. OSHA's paying for all of that stuff. So thanks to them for the snacks and coffee. There's masks and COVID tests out there next to the sign-in. So if you want to take a COVID test, feel free. If you've got the sniffles, do not hesitate to just snag one of those COVID tests. They're here for you guys. If we need more, we will buy more. Okay. So don't in any way hesitate. We've been encouraged to eat outside. So if you try to get snacks and things, try to eat outside so we don't make a mess in the room here. And I think that was all I had. Welcome.
Parking.
And parking. If you need a parking pass, let me know. We got a big stack of them. They're not enforcing very aggressively, but just in case, let us know. We got a ton of extra. So cool. Great. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. Okay, so why we're all here. Our overall interest is to constrain models of planetary surface atmosphere interactions. As I was mentioning, as we're getting out to more and more bodies and we're gathering more information, we're seeing things actually move around on the surface. And so the general motivation of this, though, is thinking about how on Earth we use laboratory and field studies to test and develop the models and calibrate them. What if we could do that on other planets, more than just take a few very limited measurements, if any, and try to use those and then assume that these models work and apply them all over the place. It would be really nice to actually get some ground truth information to actually test and robustly calibrate such models. So that's the overall motivation. Okay, and I want to point out that this is also supported by the Decadal Survey. As we're talking about these different areas of investigation, looking at processes that are active on other bodies, understanding how the atmosphere and the surface interact. These do pop up in the most recent Decadal Survey. So as we're thinking about instrument and mission concept proposals, which is ultimately what we all want to be working towards, so as to get these measurements, these are the areas that we can point to. Okay, so in developing this workshop, it's kind of all started from me and a group of people trying to develop a mission concept. And some of the questions we kept running into when thinking about looking at active processes on, in this case, Mars, what are the needed new in situ measurements to really advance the science? And, unfortunately, and that one's kind of an easy one because we have so little data. So kind of almost anything is useful. But then the other question that comes up is, can you actually collect those needed measurements? Can you get them with the frequency, the fidelity, spanning the different range of environments? Can you actually do that so as to make that advancement? So what we've been doing is I've been talking to a lot of people, a group of us have been talking to a lot of people, gathering information on the science side. Also have been tying back to different science workshops like the Planetary Dunes workshop that was recently run by Tim, going to those and say, okay, making sure we know the most up-to-date, what are the big questions, what are the measurements that are actually needed? And we'll see some talks today about that. This workshop comes in at the other part. So I don't want to talk what are the measurements here outside of this very first day when we're kind of outlining it. The focus here is on how do we collect the measurements. So as I'll show in the agenda, we're going to talk today about what the measurements are, but then after that, take those as an input, and we want to focus on the how you collect the measurements. Because in order to do the compelling science, you need to make sure you're collecting the right measurements and that you actually can collect them. And so ultimately, the big question you need for any proposal is the science compelling and feasible? And in our case, we're kind of looking at the next decade. And I think a big resounding yes for this sort of science, these sorts of investigations. And by the way, this design, those of you who are here in person, sorry, online folk, you'll have to catch me at a conference or something. We have stickers and buttons. And so we're working on getting that message out, not only within our community, but more broadly. Yes, we know what we need to measure. We can make the measurements. But part of the point of this workshop is to pull that community information together. And as we'll talk about, getting to some papers, conference presentations, things like that, gather that information, give everyone a solid foundation for instrument and mission concept proposals. All right. So to explain a little bit why we're focusing on certain areas, let me go through briefly something that we put together for IEEE. So this is a 2022 IEEE paper, which unfortunately isn't out on the website yet, but once it is, if anyone's interested, email me and I can send you the link. As outlined in this paper, the reason that I think we generally haven't done these types of investigations of looking at active processes as they are happening, more in the style of terrestrial field studies, is it's really expensive to get to the surface, right? So you want to put everything you can onto that rover. We see this happening all the time. You have very complex instruments and you need a payload suite, right? Because you need to be measuring multiple things concurrently. And so there's high complexity there. Some difficulties in instrument accommodation, perturbations due to the spacecraft itself, things like that. And also thinking about, for these types of investigations, if you're monitoring the environment, you need to be measuring that background trend as well as unpredictable perturbations, like the wind gust, like the pressure variations. You don't know when those are happening, but there are times when you want very high frequency measurements, and there are times when it's okay to just kind of get a sampling every once in a while. The problem is that we've generally done pre-scheduled observation sampling, right? And so I think we need some new ways of thinking about how to make those observations so as to capture both parts of that picture, the general trends, as well as those high frequency. We really need to understand these perturbations that are happening. And I think with onboard computing capabilities and memory and all that, we've gotten to a point that we can do some good work there. And then finally, the value of having discrete in situ measurements is not, I really understand this one place in this one period in time very well. It's, I understand it so well that now I can calibrate the models and interpret better places where I don't have those in situ measurements. That's where the science value comes, is extending it outwards. So putting all those together, we've had advancements. We have, and this is what we're going to be talking about, is ways to access planetary surfaces with small payloads in particular, where they have made it a lot cheaper. Developments in instruments and ideas about how you can compile those into a good integrated suite where you can actually collect that whole range of measurements that you need and actually correlate them for that modeling. Different acquisition strategies to characterize a very dynamic system, but remaining within your power and data volume budgets. And then we won't talk about this one quite as much, but thinking about how to maximize the science value by using those in situ observations and tying those to the models. Okay. All right, so this is just a sampler from the IEEE paper. And then, like I said, we've got, when we get to the agenda, if you look at Thursdays, this is really much how things are laid out. Thinking about different low access methods of getting, in this case, we are focused on getting to the surface, but it doesn't have to be the surface, it's your observation site. So for instance, helicopters are another way of perhaps doing this, drones. And I'm hoping, we have a number of engineers and such from the different projects joining us, so I'm hoping that they can feed into the conversation here. Here, for the mission concept that I've been working on, we're looking at using SHIELD, which is a hard impact small lander. Can get you more cheaply to the surface of Mars. As long as you don't care too much about where you land, it has a very large landing ellipse. On the broad scale, though, that can work perfect for some investigations. There's been a lot of developments in instrument design, and we have a whole lightning session tomorrow on this, as well as then several discussion periods about different instruments that are being developed to help address the measurements that are needed, both in terrestrial and planetary areas. And that's kind of the point of our field trip, is we're going to go out and look at some of these instruments and think about how do you put them together. Okay, new designs in the concept of operations. So again, as I mentioned, kind of the standard technique is that you have pre-scheduled, right? You're going to say, okay, I'm going to sample for 5 minutes every hour, but at a predetermined time. There are other methods that you could use, for instance, an environmentally responsive system. Let the environment tell you when the interesting stuff is happening and either turn on instruments or at least shift into a higher frequency mode. Alternatively, there are also ways, if you're not as power constrained, but you're more data volume constrained, maybe you can be on more, collect things at that higher frequency, but then select what you downlink. These are the high priority areas, or I can take statistics on what's happening rather than sending back all of the data. There's a lot of techniques that are being developed in that area, which I think is one of the key enablers for these types of investigations. Okay, and then thinking about what we need to measure in order to really advance the process models. So again, it's not, I'm going to study this one place in this one process and really know it super well. It's, I'm going to model it so I can better interpret what I see elsewhere. It's connect those in situ measurements to the natural system. That is where the high science value comes, not only for whatever planetary body you're studying, But now if you're developing that model outside of Earth conditions, right, you've got a better data point for even fundamental physics studies. In this case, we're mostly focused on Mars. And you'll hear Mars come up a lot in this discussion because that's where we have the high contextual data. That's where we've had the in situ measurements. So you'll hear a lot of that, but this workshop is broader, meant to be broader than Mars. Venus and Titan in particular have missions that are going there that will start to make these types of measurements. So those should be part of the conversation. Feel free to bring those other bodies in as well. I think we're likely to focus mostly on those three because when we think about in the next decade, those are the three that places that it seemed most feasible for doing these types of investigations. But eventually, certainly, we want to include all of the bodies. So feel free to bring in the other ideas, but depending, think about also just what's feasible in the next decade. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions from in the room or online about kind of why we're doing this and what our overall aim is? So I guess I didn't put it on a slide, by the way, but the overall aim of all of this work, not just this workshop, a whole bunch of other stuff we've been doing, I want to see those instrument and mission concept proposals. I want them to be super compelling and to have convinced the reviewers in the community that this is what we want. So in the next discovery call, at least one is selected that looks at these processes, right? I want to see a bunch go in and just wow them with how awesome it is. And at least one collects the right measurements that we've all been waiting for. As we develop small mission programs and ideas with Simplex and such, again, those proposals go in. I want to see them get selected so that we get the measurements. So that's maybe the framework to keep in mind is what do we need to be collecting so as to give us the foundation for getting those proposals in, convincing people that this is compelling, this is feasible. Anything online, Brian? No? Any questions from in the room? Real fast. And I haven't gotten to it yet, but wait for the talking stick if you do have a question. No? Okay. All right, so I'll just go over the general plan. Let me focus first on today. Today is a little bit different from the rest of the workshop. The rest of the workshop is very discussion focused. Today we will actually have some presentations. We intentionally put together some overview presentations because the overall aim is to understand first from the terrestrial perspective, people who've actually done the in situ measurements that we would like to be doing on other planets. What's it like doing those? And in particular, the two people we've invited to speak, I asked them to focus on investigations where they face challenges that may be a little analogous to what we would face in planetary, right? So I asked them not to describe the field experiment where they drove the semi and 20 undergrads and could change out the battery every 2 days, right? That's a cool experiment, but that doesn't quite apply to us yet in planetary. But they'll talk about some experiments they've done in more difficult to reach areas where data volume, power, and things were more constrained. You're limited to the measurements, the instruments that you have, you can't change them out, that sort of thing. And I think we'll hear some really good stuff. And what we're asking everyone here to pay attention to is, okay, what lessons can we be learning from this as we think about motivating and putting together in situ investigations for other planets? Set two, overview two, are then, okay, switching over to planetary, what are those needed measurements? So as I mentioned before, here, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of what are the measurements. There's like multiple conversations that we've been having and we could continue to have forever, right, until we actually collect them. This is going to be an overview of, from a particular group of experts, what they think the needed measurements are. This is not necessarily the measurements, but it's a pretty good start, and it's a good starting point for then our discussions about how to collect these measurements. And yeah, the questions here, what are the new measurements most needed? We're going to have two sets. First is what are the needed measurements and information we need, and then overviews of what currently, with current rovers, with current planned missions, with current laboratory studies and wind tunnel studies, what's possible, because we want to find out what do we really require going to another planet to collect, right? If we can do it in a lab on Earth, that still is important science, but it's less compelling than to have to fly a mission. We want to find those particular parts that require the new instruments and new missions. And this is all going to feed into then our field trip discussions, and then how do we make the measurements on Thursday. So if folks haven't seen it yet, I recommend checking out the block program. This is the most up-to-date version. LPI has done some of the updates, but every time there's a small change, I go in and change in the block program. Tuesday is the overview talks, and then we're starting discussions. We do have one set of group discussions, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a sec today. And then Thursday is entirely these group discussions. So we get to experiment. Please give feedback to us about what works and what doesn't. So we can, on Thursday, we're ready to go. Wednesday is the field trip, and then Friday is focused on summaries and next steps. All right, so as mentioned, we're seeking to make this a very discussion-focused workshop. So outside of the few invited overview presentations, we have no presentations. People who submitted abstracts, thank you very much for submitting those. And a lot of people put in for pre-recorded presentations or e-posters, so you could share that sort of information. Those are all pre-recorded, and I encourage people to go and watch those on your own time. We will hear lightning talks, so you can get brief advertisements about them. The focus is on discussion in the room. So you can bring in that information, but we're just not going to have someone standing up here lecturing. Discussions are generally divided into two areas, and this is based on some conversations with academic folk like Brian Jackson, who uses this in his classrooms. Small groups. So we're going to give you all some thought prompts and divide up with our in-person, probably about 2 groups, maybe 3. Online, we'll divide you guys into 4 to maybe 4 breakout rooms. Go in, talk about those. Each of those groups should have a discussion leader in the sense that somebody who's helping to just keep the discussion focused and noting down the key points. Because then, after we've had our small group discussion, we come back together and we share it as a large group. And so we'll start out with some of the summaries from the small groups, but then just have that big plenary discussion. This is going to be a little interesting because it's also hybrid. We have 20 people or so here, about 50 people online. So all of that, we're going to be trying to switch back and forth. We do want the online people to feel very present. And given they outnumber us, we want to also make sure the in-person people feel very present. So we'll be working through that. Let's see. And then on Friday, from the full group discussion, we have chairs identified in the program. Their job is to summarize those in about 10-minute presentations on Friday. So we'll start with all of those summaries, and then we'll talk about, okay, based on what we've been talking about, what are the next steps in terms of, is there something we should document, say in a review paper for the community? Is there an area that we need to have a group go off and work on further to develop this idea? Should we be proposing a new technology development program to NASA, right? Like there's a lot of different things that we could be doing. If there are any questions or issues that develop, especially in small groups, by the way, text me if anyone wants to write down my number there. That's my JPL cell number. I will be kind of floating around to the different groups to just make sure everyone's good. And then once everything's good, I may settle into one of them, but let me know. I'll leave that up a moment longer. All right, lightning talks. I think we have now all of our presentations for today's lightning talk session, but just a reminder, we have several lightning talks. These are focused on the abstracts that were submitted, so it gives people a chance to advertise their information, whether or not they submitted a pre-recorded presentation. Even if you didn't, you can still do a lightning talk, that's fine. These are meant to be 2 minutes and 1 slide. Do try to keep to that just because otherwise it gets very unwieldy. We also have room for walk-ons. So any of you online or in person that did not submit an abstract but would like to speak in one of these areas, just let me know. We have a few spots available in the program. And if you're doing that, please do send your slide in advance because we're trying to line them up so we can very quickly go through them all and not spend a bunch of time on transitions. And just a reminder, any pre-recorded presentations we have, if you go to the block program, there's a tab there and you can find those videos or e-posters. Okay, code of conduct. This is also, I take it back. This is not on the website. LBI and I had a disagreement on that. This is our code of conduct. Certainly go by anything that's on the website, but in particular, one difference here is if anyone has any issues, anything at all, something's not working right, I feel uncomfortable with this, anything like that, I saw something weird, feel free to talk to one of the conveners in person or to email. You can also do anonymous reports via the email, although of course, please give enough information so we can actually do something with it. But we really want to make sure that this is a safe and productive meeting for everyone. And in particular, we asked people to really focus on equitable participation from the online folks. And then those of you that are in person, please do respect personal COVID stances. If you didn't notice, the badges have different colors. So red indicates I prefer that people just distance until we I indicated it's okay to approach. I'm getting a COVID test and I'm waiting for results and things like that. And I just want to play it really safe. Yeah. Here are the COVID considerations. We do have masks available, as Brian mentioned. We also have tests available. Please do, if somebody is more risk adverse than you, please go with that one. Just be respectful of that. There's lots of hand sanitizer around and things like that. If anyone has signs of illness or a positive recent COVID test, please do attend remotely. We just want to do our parts to not spread it. Additional policies. It's too late for y'all now, but everything is being recorded. Don't bring up anything that's proprietary or otherwise restricted, please. Our plan is everything will be on YouTube. We want to share this with the community. This is part of that socializing the idea with the community. So we're attempting to live stream it. I think we are live streaming it. Excellent, through Brian's link. And then these will also be recorded and left on our YouTube channel afterwards. And folks are welcome to blog, and we will have some journalists joining us. If any of the journalists talk to you, it's obviously up to you how much you want to talk to them. We are going to remind the journalists that they should make sure to talk to the sources of information before they publish anything, just to make sure they got it right.
And let me sorry about that.
No.
We'll also have media releases to sign. So if you are interviewed, you may be interviewed. And we'll have a media release for you. That was very dramatic.
Okay. What's next? Okay, so I mentioned a little bit, this is just a teaser for Friday's conversation. One of the things that we will talk about is we do have a special issue tied to this. We're also welcoming contributions from the Planetary Dunes Workshop, as well as from the broader community. The focus of this special issue in the Planetary Science Journal is what is needed to enable planetary in situ investigations of active processes. So beyond that, it's pretty broad. You can talk about mission concepts, you can talk about instrument concepts, you can talk about interpretation of observed morphology of features, as long as you can connect it back to this helps enable in situ measurements in this way. So think about what you're working on. Also, as we're going through the workshop, we're looking to identify 1 to 2 kind of topics that could fit into nice review papers as outcomes from this workshop. We also have some science review papers that are being worked on. So we're bringing in the science, and then also the focus of this workshop. How do we make those measurements? And I'll just leave this up here for the recording. There's been a number of publications and presentations that people might find interesting, and feel free to talk with me or any of my co-authors about this further. I think that's it. Yes. Wow, I have 5 minutes left. Are there any questions or comments about how this workshop is going to go? Otherwise, we have a few minutes until we start with our first presentation. We are going to try very hard to keep on time, especially for the online folk, right? If people are choosing to dial in at particular times, we don't want to shift the schedule around too much. Anything in here? Brian, do you have anything more you want to say? No. Okay. Yes. Good point. I have one. Aw, thanks, Jim. Okay, if there isn't anything, we'll start at 9:05. Everyone can take a quick break. You heard bathrooms are right out there. Oh, we do have a classroom available for those in person if you need to step out, say for a meeting or something. Good places are you can go outside here, and we'll try to leave that door propped open. If you do get locked out, just knock and we'll let you back in. There's a courtyard. If you just go out this way a little bit, you'll see a courtyard. You can go in there. I hear that has better cell phone reception than many of the other places in the building. And just past that, room 510, I believe. There's a classroom, and that's going to be our quiet area. If you need to take a meeting or anything like that, that's another area available for us all, or for the small group, small discussion breakouts. So, okay, thanks. 9:05, we'll kick off with Charlie Bristow and Cynthia Dinwiddie.